Walmart greeter. Frank, 72, stood in the same place every morning, at the entrance to Walmart, greeting customers. He'd been repeating the same routine for 15 years, until that Tuesday morning when two masked men walked in. Frank's actions stunned the entire town, because no one knew who he really was. The man everyone knows in Sweetwater. On the main street of Sweetwater, Texas, the big blue Walmart sign glinted in the morning sun. As the small town's largest store, it was the locals' daily shopping destination, a meeting point, and a source of gossip. Every morning at 6:30, 30 minutes before the doors opened, Frank Morrison would be there. Seeing Frank was as natural to Sweetwater residents as sunrise. His blue Walmart vest, white shirt, clean-shaven face, and his posture always remained in the same spot, to the right of the main entrance, next to the cart pull. "Welcome to Walmart," he always said, his voice the same tone, the same friendly smile. But this morning was different. There was an unfamiliar tension in Frank's posture. A 15-year-old secret Martha Henderson, a 68-year-old retired local grocery store owner, approached Frank as he pushed his shopping cart. She'd chatted with Frank almost every week for 15 years, but she truly knew very little about him. "Good morning, Frank," Martha said, as always. "How are you today?" "I'm fine, Martha. Thank you. How are you?" Frank's response was his usual, but his eyes were constantly scanning the parking lot. Martha noticed this, but didn't say anything. Frank had always been a little different. Many people, like Martha, had talked to Frank for years, but no one knew his true story. Where he came from, where he lived, if he had any family. Frank had always been vague about these things. "Oh, I moved here," he'd say. "I retired," he'd say. But the details never came. All they knew was this: Frank Morrison had moved to Sweetwater 15 years ago, started working as a greeter at Walmart, and hadn't changed since. He lived in the same apartment building, drove the same old pickup truck, stopped in the same place and said the same things. But this morning, Frank's behavior was different. His eyes were constantly moving, as if he were waiting for something. Town gossip. Carl Patterson, the local barber, and one of the town's biggest gossip sources, had a theory about Frank. "I think he's an ex-con," he'd tell his customers. "Anyone who's so quiet has something to hide." Sue Ellen Williams, the diner owner, had another theory. "I think he's running from his ex-wife. He's always melancholy. Maybe he has kids and misses them." But Tom Bradley, Sweetwater's former police chief, had continued to keep an eye on Frank after his retirement. What Tom noticed was different. "That man's bearing, his walk, he's the bearing of someone with military training," he'd tell his wife. "But in what field, when, where, it's all unclear." Frank was aware of the gossip, of course. In small towns, everyone butts into each other's business. But he didn't care. Or at least, he pretended not to. This morning, Frank's mind was elsewhere. He was disturbed by the news he'd heard on the local news last night. In nearby towns, a series of armed robbers were targeting department stores. The same method: 2 men, masked, quick entry, and exit. Frank's experienced eyes were scrutinizing each customer more closely this morning. Danger. Approaching. At 9:47, Frank's instincts began to alarm. He'd spotted an older black Camaro slowly circling the parking lot. There were two people in the vehicle, and they were constantly looking outside the store instead of entering. Frank's experienced eyes immediately caught the details. The driver was young, white, around 25-30. The passenger appeared older, around 35 to 40. Both were wearing hooded sweatshirts, an odd choice on a blisteringly hot Texas morning. A normal greeter wouldn't have noticed these details, but Frank Morrison wasn't a normal greeter. As the Camaro passed the store for the third time, Frank slowly shifted his position. He stood closer to the door, but seemingly still in the same place. He reached his left hand into his vest pocket, his fingers automatically finding the emergency button. But he didn't press it yet. He didn't want to set off a false alarm. He'd been in this business for 15 years and had never encountered a situation like this. When the Camaro arrived for the fourth time, Frank made a firm decision. This was different from normal. Critical moments. At 9:52, the Camaro pulled into the store parking lot and parked in the nearest space. Frank's pulse quickened, but his face remained unchanged. Still the same friendly smile, the same calm demeanor. Two men got out. One carried a duffel bag. The other had his hands hidden in his pockets. Frank's experienced eyes continued to record their details. The driver was about 6 feet tall, athletically built, with a slight tremor in his right hand. The shorter but thicker-set man in the passenger seat, his eyes constantly shifting. They both approached Frank as they walked toward the store. Frank's fingers were on the alarm button, but he still waited. "Good morning, gentlemen," Frank said, as always. "Welcome to Walmart." The taller man nodded slightly but didn't make eye contact. The other didn't respond at all. Both men walked briskly inside. Frank's 50 years of experience told him these weren't regular customers, but no crime had yet been committed. At that moment, Frank Morrison was forced to confront the secret he had been keeping for 15 years. The hidden past. Frank Morrison's true story began in 1968. He went to Vietnam as an 18-year-old farmer's son, but when he returned, he was no longer the same person. From 1968 to 1971, Frank served in my Special Operations Unit, Recon Marines, an elite unit of soldiers operating behind enemy lines, operating silently, honing every reflex necessary for survival. For 3 years, Frank had learned to observe the enemy, perceive danger from afar, and make the right decisions in critical moments. But when the war ended, he didn't know what to do with these skills. When he returned home, his family didn't recognize him. His friends didn't understand. Frank's concept of a normal life had vanished. For 20 years, he worked various jobs, moved to different cities, and was constantly on the move, until he turned 52. Then he made up his mind. He would live a quiet, simple life. In a small town like Sweetwater, at a mundane job like Walmart, in a routine where no one would disturb him. And for 15 years, he had succeeded. Frank Morrison had completely buried his old identity, living only as a humble greeter. But this morning, the old Frank Morrison was beginning to return. Alarm moments. Something was wrong inside. Frank sensed it, but he didn't yet have concrete evidence to act on. He couldn't see the in-store security cameras, but his ears were picking up every sound. There was less conversation than usual. Customer voices had faded. And most importantly, Frank's experienced ears noticed. Footsteps were very fast. At 9:56, Frank made his decision. He pressed the alarm button. The silent alarm system was activated. The red light on the store manager's desk flashed, and simultaneously, an automatic signal went out to the local police station. But it would be 5 to 7 minutes before the police arrived. Frank knew it would be too late. At that moment, shouting was heard throughout the store. "Everyone down! This is a robbery!" Frank's blood ran cold. The moment he had been dreading for 15 years had arrived. Critical decision. Sounds of panic rose inside the store. Customers screaming, footsteps, men's voices shouting, "Get on the ground!" Frank Morrison knew he had two options at that moment. Option 1, wait outside, wait for the police, be safe. That's what a normal 72-year-old greeter would do. Option 2, go inside. 50 years of military training kicked in inside Frank's head. The lessons he learned in the jungles of Vietnam. Protecting civilians in danger is the priority. For 15 years he had tried to be Frank Morrison, but in that moment his old identity returned. He began to walk slowly into Walmart. Chaos. Inside the store was in complete chaos. 2 armed robbers were threatening the cashiers behind the customer service counter. About 15 to 20 customers were lying on the floor, some crying silently, others praying with trembling voices. When Frank entered, none of them noticed him. The entrance of an elderly receptionist seemed strange to anyone, but Frank's eyes quickly analyzed the situation. Robber 1, near the main register, threatening the cashiers with a gun. He held a large gym bag in his left hand. Robber 2, checking out customers, constantly glancing at the door, very nervous. Frank's military experience immediately kicked in. The 2 men appeared uncoordinated and amateurish, but they were armed and threatening people. Old reflexes. Frank quietly hid behind the shelves of the electronics department. Here he was close to the robbers and could observe them. His training from 50 years ago kicked in. Analyze the situation first, then plan. Robber 1 appeared more experienced, but he was very nervous. His hands were shaking. Robber 2 kept yelling, "Hurry!" meaning they had no plan. Frank had learned a valuable lesson during his operations in Vietnam. A panicking enemy is the most dangerous enemy. In that moment, Frank forgot he was 72 years old. Marine Corporal Frank Morrison, 21 years old in Vietnam, returned. Action. Frank's plan was simple. Neutralize Robber 2, then stop Robber 1. He moved slowly through the electronic racks, silently, holding his breath, just as he had 50 years earlier when he infiltrated enemy camps. Robber 2 was still yelling at the customers, "Nobody move! If the police come, all of you!" He couldn't finish his sentence. Frank quietly crept up behind him, wrapped his left arm around the man's neck, and controlled his gun with his right. The movement was so swift and silent that Robber 1 didn't notice what had happened to his friend for a while. His chokehold technique from 50 years ago was still working perfectly. Robber 2 fainted in Frank's arms 5 seconds later, falling to the ground in his own arms. Frank grabbed his gun, unloaded it for safety, and began to slowly approach Robber 1. The final showdown. Robber 1 finally realized the situation had changed. When he turned, he was shocked by what he saw. His friend on the ground, a 72-year-old receiver approaching him with a gun in hand. "What? Who are you?" Frank's voice was calm and controlled. "I'm Frank Morrison, and you're going to put that gun down now. You're just an old—" Robber 1 couldn't finish his sentence because what he saw in Frank's eyes frightened him. In this old man's eyes was the cold determination only experienced warriors possess. "Drop your weapon. Hands up. Slow movements." Frank's voice sounded just like the orders he'd given to enemy soldiers 50 years earlier. Robber 1's hand was trembling. I'll kill you." "No, you won't," Frank continued his advance, "because you're just an amateur robber, and I'm a Marine. Until the police arrive." Those words hung in the air. "I'm a Marine." Robber 1's hand began to shake even more. There was no hesitation, no fear in Frank's approach. Only the confidence born of 50 years of professional military training. "For the last time, drop the gun." Robber 1 looked into Frank's eyes and knew. This old man wasn't bluffing. He slowly put his gun down and raised his hands. Frank kicked the gun to a safe distance, then laid Robber 1 face down next to his friend. At that moment, police sirens rang out from the store door. Customers began to rise, some crying, others applauding. But Frank paid no attention to the applause or the praise. He simply put the gun in a safe place, raised his hands, and waited until the police arrived. The truth emerges. Sheriff Tom Bradley was one of the first officers to respond. When he entered the store, he was shocked by what he saw. 2 robbers lying handcuffed on the floor. Frank Morrison waiting with his hands raised, the customers safe. "Frank? What's this?" "Hello, Tom." There were 2 armed robbers. Now they're gone. Tom recognized Frank's calm tone, but this time it was different. More military. The more the customers told, the more astonished Tom became. 72-year-old greeter Frank Morrison had single-handedly neutralized 2 armed robbers. "Frank," Tom asked, "how do you know about this?" Frank paused. The secret he'd kept for 15 years was finally coming out. "Vietnam, 1968-1971. Marine Recon." Tom's jaw dropped. Marine Recon, a special operations unit, one of the most elite military units. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Frank shrugged. "It hasn't been necessary until today." The town changed. In the hours that followed, news spread throughout Sweetwater. Walmart greeter Frank Morrison was actually a Vietnam War veteran and elite Marine. Throughout the evening, crowds gathered outside Frank's house, some to thank him, others simply to see him. The local TV station, newspapers, even CNN wanted to cover it, but Frank refused them all. "I just did my job," he would say. "Nothing else." But Sweetwater was no longer the same. The man known for 15 years as Frank the Greeter had now become Frank the Hero. The days that followed. Monday morning, Frank arrived at Walmart at 6:30 a.m. as usual. But this time, it was different. The customers looked at him differently, with respect, with admiration. When Martha Henderson arrived, she asked, "Frank, now we know your story. Why didn't you ever tell it?" Frank replied with his usual smile, "Martha, the past is the past. What matters is today." But something had changed. Frank was no longer secretive. The 15-year-old secret was out. And maybe that was a good thing. Epilogue. Real heroes. Today, in Sweetwater, Frank Morrison is still a greeter at Walmart. But he's no longer just Frank. He's now Marine Frank, or Hero Frank. On that Tuesday morning, a 72-year-old man, using his training from 50 years ago, stopped 2 armed robbers, perhaps saving dozens of lives. But for Frank, it was simply doing the right thing. Because once a Marine, always a Marine. And sometimes, the greatest heroes are the old men who wait silently for 15 years. The people of Sweetwater now know. Never be fooled by appearances. Because that seemingly ordinary old man might have stories in his past you never imagined. The end chart. For 15 years, no one knew who Frank Morrison really was. But that Tuesday morning, everyone learned. Real heroes wait silently, and when necessary, they take action.